And that's what was happening. I was photographing slides, and I would mail them back to my mom, who put them in the freezer. And then I would go back home and I would work for a while to earn enough money to process them.
Wow.
Because I had no money. And so it would be years later before I would see actually what I was photographing.
That's bananas.
That's a terrible way to learn how to get better.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This is Brave New Work, a podcast about reinventing our organizations and the search for a more adaptive and human way of working. I'm Aaron Dignan, and I'm joined by my co-host, Rodney Evans.
Hello, everyone.
We are also joined today by friend of the show, former guest, Kevin Kelly, the senior maverick at Wired and the author of the forthcoming book, Vanishing Asia. Kevin, welcome back to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, as always. Thanks.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about Kevin's new book and change. But before we dig into that and pack our bags and head off, we, of course, have to check in. You got to check in for your flight.
We got to check in for our flight together, yes. We will begin this episode like all the others with a check-in question. And inspired by the summary that I got to see of your book, Kevin, I'm going to use the check-in question. What is a food you're super into right now? Can be a composed dish, an ingredient, anything that you are leaning heavily into at the moment. And Aaron will start with you, and then Kevin and I will finish it off.
Interesting. I am very, very into squash right now. I'm doing a lot of like burnt butter, roasted honey, pistachios, goat cheese, squash. Anything with those combinations is working for me at the moment.
Very nice. Kevin, what about you?
I'm really into chocolate. As everybody knows, chocolate is the fourth food group, and you simply cannot have too much of it. The higher the count, the more pure it is, the better. It tastes like dirt, but it really works for me.
All right. God, I need you to teach me that skill, Kevin. I've been trying to convert to enjoying dark chocolate, and it's just not sticking.
You just got to grind up.
I gotta work harder at this. I had a hard time answering this, but at the moment, so we made a trip recently in keeping with the theme of today's show. We went to a huge Asian grocery store that is very close to our house, which is amazing, but we hadn't gone since pre-pandemic because we were just not going to big stores that we like to browse in very often. Anyway, we went to H Mart. Ed bought a big giant tub of gochujang, and we have been eating like noodles with gochujang and Brussels sprouts. And like, it is just like as a saucy seasoning base made it into every dish that I have enjoyed in like the last month and brings me very fondly back to my time in South Korea. So that is my current favorite flavor.
And very on topic for today's episode.
I do what I can.
All right. So today's topic is Vanishing Asia. And then we're going to find some of the connections between this magnum opus of a book and what we usually talk about on this show. And I guess maybe to start, Kevin, can you just tell the audience a little bit about where this project started and what it became and what it is now?
Yeah, I may start at the back. What it is now is a very large book. We call it a book, but it's actually 3 books because it's so big, of over 1,000 pages, 1,080 pages of photographic evidence documenting the traditions, texture of an old Asia, and an Asia that is rapidly going away. These may be festivals, these may be ceremonies, there may be costumes, architecture, urban vistas. It's the whole thing that you might imagine in your mind of an old Asia, and I've collected them together over 49 years of travel in Asia, and I put them into this huge, humongous book that is almost like a time machine. So you open it up and you go through it and you're kind of in another planet far, far long ago, far, far away. And so you take a kind of a trip. But what happens when you're turning through and you're seeing is that it's a journey to differences and otherness, because these are all design solutions to the normal challenges we have of how we live, how we dress, what our homes look like. And here's a whole nother different alternative way of doing things. And that's sort of what this book, Vanishing Asia, is about. And I'm having a Kickstarter campaign right now to try and get as many pre-sales so that we can print it at a price that enables it to get into as many hands as possible. It is a big artifact. I will admit right up front that not everybody will even have room in their bookshelf for this. It's a problem. I mean, you kind of almost need your own little table for it, kind of like the David Hockney book, which has its own stand.
Yeah.
We haven't gone that direction, but could have, because it's a very big book. Besides being thick, it's also large in terms of the size. So what I'm offering is sort of an ode to otherness, a way of thinking differently about the things that we normally have to take care of. And I would include in that ways that people work and ways that we get things done. I've observed that old ways often have a seed of difference that might provoke a new solution, a new way. To give one example, going barefoot. When I first began photographing almost 49 years ago, 50 years ago, it was not uncommon in many Asian countries for people to be barefoot all the time, including barefoot in the cities.
Right.
You'll never see that now. If anybody has 2 cents in their pocket, they're going to buy foam flip-flops.
Right.
But in that kind of callous barefoot idea in the city, you can have the idea of this kind of the vibrant 5-foot barefoot trend where you could imagine, well, how could we return to that? What might be the future shoes be if you were trying to make barefoot better, or the better barefoot?
Right.
And so it's that kind of idea bank that I think the book comes and works for me. Is what are some of the solutions that may no longer be valid because of other reasons, that may still have some core, some kernel of difference that might work now. Because the truth is, and this goes right into the territory that you're mine, which is that in today's economy, everything is powered by thinking different, by thinking differently, by being able to have a different idea. And that becomes more and more challenging the more connected we get. The more we're connected to each other 24 hours a day, the harder it becomes to think differently. And I'm kind of trying to retain some of these ideas as a prompt to help us to think differently while we're all connected.
I love that as a prompt, and yeah, it really sparked something for me while you were talking. So Aaron knows this, but Kevin, we don't know each other that well. I took a sabbatical from work about 10 years ago with my then fiance, maybe? I don't know. We're married now. And we traveled around Asia. So looking at the maps of those footpaths, there was quite a bit of overlap. And one of the things that I noticed and took away in terms of lifestyle, but had not really thought about in terms of work, is just how many elements of life that we observed there were simple because of necessity, and yet were incredibly effective. And when you just said that about the 5-finger, sneaker, like what it immediately made me think of is about squatting. Like one of the things that I noticed so much everywhere in Asia is like everyone squats. Everyone just squats when they're hanging out and wasting time and waiting for a bus, et cetera, et cetera. And like chairs and the way that we are ergonomically has completely fucked up our bodies in modernity. And it's like, oh, well, there are cultural reasons and architectural reasons for not having bulky furniture in places, and financial reasons, but also just physically, naturally, I imagine a lot fewer people who live in Mongolia have really chronic lower back pain than Americans do. And so it really sparked something for me when you said that, because of how many times in the 10 years intervening, I've stopped to be like, I don't need to buy a specific tool for this. I don't need to come up with a different solution for this. There is a simple way that works, but we're so not socialized to that, I think, many of us, in terms of how we grow up in America. So I don't know. That was kind of just a tangent, but you just really made me think, and I wanted to say that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and you're absolutely right on about the squatting, which is sort of the way people rest. And as you said, instead of standing all the time, they'll squat part of the time, and it's almost like a yoga position. It's stretching, but it's comfortable. And the really great squatters can actually squat as a tripod. If you're flexible enough, they can actually sit for hours like a tripod, meaning they're on their butt, and then there's the 2 feet with their knees bent, and they're solid on the
Yeah.
ground. They're
They're
centered.
stable.
They're grounded.
So what I'm wondering, having followed your work for a long time, you have been writing and chronicling and challenging for decades. Why has it taken this long to bring Vanishing Asia to life?
That's a good question. So I would say, first of all, this is sort of almost closer to an art project, which I define as kind of cool, but not necessarily that useful. It's an art project in the sense that there was no one on Twittering saying we need more pictures of old Asia. It's a compulsion. For me, it was a compulsion to do. I just needed to do it. I didn't know that I needed to do it. To go back to your earlier question of how this began, I was not intending to do this. I left and went to Asia instead of going to college in 1972, and it was an alternative for me to a university. And I joked that after my first decade there, I awarded myself an honorary PhD in Asian studies. So that's how it kind of began. Although I was photographing from the very beginning, I did want to be a National Geographic photographer, but I didn't want to be on assignment. So I decided to give myself the assignment. And I always had in mind, not always, but somewhere in the, I don't know, couple of years in, I kind of imagined a book. I did do one book that was published by Taschen very early on, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't big enough. It wasn't complete enough. And I changed what I was photographing a little bit. So books are not at the center of culture anymore. I think this may be my last big paper first book. There's not going to be a digital version of this. It doesn't work in digital. I've tried it. You need a really big screen. People don't have them. If you can try to read this on a screen or iPad, it just doesn't work in a digital format. So there's not going to be a digital version of it. It is a native book, and books, for all the many, many virtues they have, and I'm speaking right now surrounded in a 2-story high library of my books that I love and need, but they're no longer really at the center of the culture. And the moving screen is this. We've moved from being people of the book to becoming people of the screen, and it's the moving image on the screen, and what's beyond the screen, or the kind of the falling into the screen with AR and VR, all that kind of stuff. That is where the center of the culture is moving to. So I'm just saying, there's not like this is not sort of a fashionable thing to do. I'm not. It's not a nifty. I'm not riding the trend here. It was coming more out of a compulsion to do this and to complete this work, which was still photography on a page. It was something I kind of grew up thinking about. I grew up as a photographer, thinking in terms of books. I'm a magazine junkie. I started a magazine on paper, several magazines on paper, including Wired. And so that's home for me. And here's the honest answer. There's an audience of one for this book. It's me. I made this book for me. In fact, I can say honestly that if we only print one copy of it, I'm happy. That would have been enough. But since I'm printing one, I want to print more and share it. And that's the whole idea of making this cheap enough to have other people buy it. Because I'm going to make one, and then it's like, well,
why not make a few
I'll
more?
make a bunch.
Yes, please.
That's really what it comes down to.
I'll dedicate a room in my house to this book, Kevin. So one thing I really wanted to ask you about, and we can, maybe as we get into discussion of cultural changes, one thing that occurred to me as I was reading a bit was how different was being a photographer of rural places 50 years ago to now.
Yeah. It's immense. I don't even know where to begin. But here's one thing I would say. I would say that probably everybody listening to this podcast right now has probably taken at least 2 photos in the last 12 hours, 10 to 4 hours. When I left, my family had a Kodak Brownie camera with 24 exposure roll in it, which they did once a year.
Wow.
Okay, so they would take 24 pictures in a year. That would include, Christmas, our birthdays,
Sure.
whatever it was. I built, when I was like 10 or 12, a nature museum in our basement, complete with exhibits and everything. And there's not a single photograph that exists of that. So
didn't make the cut.
They're
right.
like, sorry,
that's one.
We've got that bar mitzvah coming up.
Right,
So
we've got 23 raw exposures this year. And it was very expensive. So even when I left, each time I clicked a shutter, it was equivalent of $5.
Wow.
So photography was not a thing. If to do photography back then, when I first started in high school in the 60s, it was you had to be a chemist. You had to do all the chemical processing and printing yourself. So there was no other way to make prints. And so unless you had a lot of money, you hired somebody. But photography was in a very different arena where now everybody is a photographer. Everybody knows kind of the basic language of lenses and telescopic lens or exposures. This is like common knowledge. Back when I started in photography, nobody knew it. Therefore, when I was traveling in Asia, I often had the first camera that anybody had ever seen.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. They kind of knew what it was about, but they'd never seen a camera. They never even had a picture taken in many cases. So the role of photography was in a very, very different position. It was sort of exotic. It wasn't, people weren't vamping for it because they didn't know what it was. They didn't, that wasn't what the response for it. The response at the very, very beginning was often, what's the word? Confusion.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, why would you want to take a picture of me? It's very expensive. They knew that. Of course, they couldn't see it, and that was the other thing that photography meant was, I imagine if you're taking pictures with the camera, but there was no screen on your phone.
Sure.
You couldn't see what you had taken. You couldn't see it until a year later. And that's what was happening. I was photographing slides, and I would mail them back to my mom, who put them in the freezer, and then I would go back home and I would work for a while to earn enough money to process them because I had no money. And so it would be years later before I would see actually what I was photographing. That's a terrible way to learn how to get better because that feedback loop. So the point is that it was a very different, photography has a very different role now. It is ubiquitous. We think in terms of this, but that was not present at the time, which was maybe an advantage to me getting it, but it was a much more difficult process to get those images because of the expense, because I couldn't see what I was doing, and all these other reasons. So it played a different role in the culture at large.
So I want to shift gears now a little bit. We've talked a bit about Kevin and a bit about Asia. I actually want to zoom in on the vanishing part. And I'm just curious, given that that is your assessment of what's going on, do you feel like there's a point of no return for a culture or a system where it can't hold on or it can't recover and it kind of just has to give way to modernity or give way to the new? And how have you seen that dynamic being held by the people involved? I just want to hear kind of your overall reflection on the vanishing force.
Yeah, it's very important. It's very large scale trend. And so in some respects, this book is sort of like a lie in the sense that this does not represent what Asia looks like. This is the 1%. This is the 1% that's left. That's there. So most of Asia it's modern, it's concrete, it's electrical wires everywhere. It's those images are very prevalent as well. And what's vanishing, there's often a reason why they're vanishing, because many of these old things that have this incredible beauty are impractical to anybody who has any ambitions to do things. And so the reason why a young person will leave the organic food of their home and this beautiful village with handcrafted materials and an incredible family support system, and knowing who they are, and they'll buy a one-way tickets into the city where it's can be grimy and dirty and uncertain, and they don't know who they are. They do that because they're moving to increased possibilities and choices. They don't want to be what their father was, which was a farmer. They don't want to be what their mom was, which was a housewife who had very little rights. And so they're migrating to increase possibilities and choices, the possibility of being a ballerina or a mathematician or a web designer or whatever that is. And they want to live in waterproof box that has air conditioning and Wi-Fi, and I would too.
Right?
Yeah,
Why not? Sure,
we do.
Yeah.
Right. And so I understand why these things are vanishing. And the question is what's replacing them. And my observation about the cultures of Asia is that this is not your father's or grandfather's Asia. It's not their father's Asia. Let's take one example, China, where I spent a lot of time recently. The young people are inventing a brand new immigrant culture. America was the energy that America had in the last century was due to the fact that we had an immigrant culture. We had this melting pot. We had this incredible hybrid vigor that came from people arriving from all different countries, coming together, meeting, rubbing shoulders, having to work with each other, coming with different assumptions and backgrounds, and using that as an energy to innovate and make new things and head into the frontier. And that's happening in China. But the immigration is all internal. They're coming from Yunnan, and they're coming from Inner Mongolia, and they're coming from Guizhou, and they speak completely unintelligible languages at home. They learn Mandarin in school, which is the lingua franca. It's like the English, and they come into the cities, and these cities are brand new, and they're all filled with immigrants. So Shenzhen, the great manufacturing hub, which is next to Hong Kong, has 12 million people. Not a single one of them was born in Shenzhen because it was a fishing village just 25 years ago, and there was nobody there. So all those 12 million people are immigrants who have migrated in there from different parts, very different backgrounds. The difference between Inner Mongolia and Xinjiang and Guiyang are huge, and they're rubbing shoulders together, and they're inventing a new culture, and they find some of the things that their parents did to be as alien as the 60s generation might have thought about their parents. And so they're making a brand modified culture. And so it's exciting right now. They don't know what they're making. They don't know where they're going. Everybody in Asia is driving 1,000 miles an hour, and they have no idea where they're going, but they want to go faster. So there could be some disasters coming, but it's thrilling right now just to see the speed at which they're kind of reinventing themselves.
That feels like a good segue to something I wanted to ask you about, which is when you think about traditional ways that you have observed and experienced, and I know there's a lot of variety because you went to a lot of places a lot of times, but when you think about what is at the root of sort of the OS of an older way of being, of the Asia that is vanishing, and you contrast that with the OS of, modern American extractive capitalism. What are some of the principles that you see in each, and what can we be learning or applying or be thoughtful about? And conversely, what can vanishing Asia be thoughtful about so they don't end up in some of the same messes that we have?
Yeah. No, I think it's one of the central questions right now. As it's no news to anybody that there is an emerging, I wouldn't call it battle, but there's an emerging game between China and the U.S. and the general approaches, and it's not clear where each is going and what will happen. I would say, it's like in the scenario business, we call this as a wild card. This is like we have really it could go in 5 different directions, and they could all be very, very different from each other, and it's really hard to even predict where we're even leaning right now. So I would say, yes, I would say there are some, the general kind of broad generalization filled with all kind of caveats about Asian culture is that they do tend to stress the value of the group and societies less than the individualistic honoring that we do in America, and almost fetishize this idea of the self-reliant individual and the rights of the individual. And the kind of stereotypical counterpoint to that is the Asian society valuing the group, kind of like the almost extreme version of some of the Japanese practices where the group is paramount, and the needs of the group, the consensus of the group, etc. And so I think we're headed. Well, I think globalization is unstoppable. No matter what happens between the U.S. and China, globalization will continue. And part of that is I think we are manufacturing, or we are devising, a convergent global culture. My observation of traveling around the world is that most, that the people or kids are listening to the same music, watching the same movies, and more importantly, they study the same things in school. If you take the curriculum, it's exactly the same. The one difference is that every country might have their own kind of history they're teaching, the content, but they're learning science, they're learning mathematics. It's the same math, it's the same science, it's the same English, and that idea of kind of a universal curriculum, that's the first time. And that's producing, and as well as this kind of global, the common culture globally is producing, I think, a convergent culture along certain axes. And the way I would say it is, Maslow's hierarchy, that at the bottom rungs of that, the shelter and clothing, we are converging as a planet on those things. You take a picture in a urban area, you remove the language, you can't tell where that was taken.
Yeah.
And I think that even as we converge on these lower levels of the hierarchy, which Maslow never really made, but we've interpreted it as that, I think that we will have a chance to diverge at the upper levels in terms of what it means to us, in terms of how we see what we do, the name of our vocation, that will kind of continue to have diversity at the higher levels of what it means to us, even as we converge completely at the lower ones. And so that's where I see the kind of cultures between West and East going, that we the West will learn to, I don't think we're in this process right now, we'll learn to value the societal needs, the societal infrastructure, the power of groups, small and large, how to collaborate at scale in real time. That's where a lot of the new tools are going to be invented. And the Asia is going to absorb some of the values that we have of the power of the reckless, challenging, rebellious individual who questions authority. That's that's at the core of all innovation, is questioning authority. Well, questioning authority is one of the things you don't do in Asia generally. And so they're kind of learning how to do more of that.
Well, and that brings up another question that we had, which is the Western view of Asia is that it is simultaneously very ancient and very modern, very bureaucratic and top down, and yet innovative and kind of in a Wild West, Wild East mode.
The Wild East, I love that. That's a great title of a book, The Wild East. But go on.
Is it accurate to view it as a polarity? Is it accurate to view it that binary, or is there something more complex going on?
It's always more complex than you think. That's that's the beauty of journalism, is that once you get into the details, it's a lot more complicated always. But to first approximation, we're going to see that Asia is far more innovative than Westerners assumed. And I think there's going to be a kind of the shift in the cultural gravity away from the West and into Asia. We're headed into the Asian century, and I think there's going to be movies, books, music coming out of Asia that will be not just K-pop, level, but will be the main event. And I would say within 10 years, we'll see a product come out of Asia that was Asian designed and Asian made that will be the gold standard, that will be the thing that everybody in the world wants and desires, including everybody in the West and the US. Maybe it's an electric car, or maybe it's some smart glasses. I don't know what it will be, but it'll come, and this will be a huge kind of requiring a reset and a recalculation in people's mind that, oh no, they're just copying stuff. Well, that hasn't been true for at least 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't yet had the moment of reckoning. But what's happening, and this is this kind of cultural change, what's happening is that you have all these kind of, gurus, innovation gurus going over to China and saying, and other parts of Asia, saying, here's what you need. You need to have science fairs. You need to have, the scenarios. You go through this whole list of things to bring innovation, and they're going right down the list, and they're doing all of them, and they're working. It's kind of like what happened in
Right.
Japan, where the efficiency experts went over and said, here's what you need to do, and the Japanese did them, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're teaching them how to be innovative, and it works. And so that's part of this change in the culture, where I think they are going to bring innovation in and have some of that questioning authority and just questions as more than they have, and make some new kind of way of doing it. And that's a huge benefit, that we have alternative ways of doing things.
And I think it'll sneak up on us, sort of like the levee breaking in a way, because while there may be a grand delay before they unlock some of that stuff, when they do unlock it, they often do it at a scale that really dwarfs what we're used to, because of the size of the culture and the willingness to go big. And I'm thinking right now of, one of the strongest examples and largest examples in our space of innovation around organization design is Haier, which is the Chinese appliance manufacturer. And the scale at which they're experimenting with structure and authority, it kind of dwarfs even the most radical American counterparts. And even though it's the first of its kind, so to speak, in that market, it does feel like a watershed moment.
Yeah, I agree. There is an arithmetic at work here, which is, if you just take China and India alone, that's 3 billion people versus the 350 million in America. We're 1/10 the size of India and China. And increasingly, what they do matters more to the world just because of their size, just because of the scale of things that they're attempting. And yeah, Haier is a remarkable company, and they do take, innovation and making new things very, very seriously, and they're willing to try things at a scale that many other places don't have the opportunity to.
One thing that I wanted to ask about, which is related to organizational culture stuff, while we're sort of on the topic. So when we look at orgs and we're in them and we're trying to help them adopt new and better ways, one of the things that we are considering is what is actually organizational debt and what might they try instead, et cetera. And also at the same time, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is the role of tradition. Because when we go into orgs, it's like, certainly this year, in our house, we could not put up a Christmas tree because it's not strictly necessary, and it takes a day, and there's a lot of needles to clean up afterward. And that tradition gives us something. So we shouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. So how do we think about advancing culture and, looking at tradition with a somewhat critical eye around its utility, rather than just being this is old, or this is inefficient, or this is unnecessary, we don't need it?
No, I think you're absolutely right on that. We, in a way that we probably didn't appreciate until we started to remove some of these traditions, is that we crave them and really want them. I don't have very many regrets with our growing up with our family, but one of the regrets I do have is I wish we had invented more family traditions, because the kids the older they got, the more they kind of crave them, the more they depended on them, the more they returned to them, even though they were silly things like, pancakes every Sunday morning, no matter what. That was just it's a sort of a meaningless thing, but it becomes hugely meaningful just by the repetition, by the fact it becomes a family tradition, and all kinds of other things come
Yeah.
around it. So I've noticed that, it's like, okay, the thing about traditions is they don't actually have to be like ancient. That was the genius of Burning Man.
Yeah.
Burning Man just blatantly, nakedly said, this is a made up tradition, and we're going to burn the man every year so that we can burn it next year. And and so it was like, okay, they made this invented mythology that seemed to work in some ways almost as good as one that was 1,000 years old for many people. And I'm thinking of, like, Singles Day in China, which is this thing. It's a kind of a big buying day, but it's acquiring all kinds of other things around it, and it's in a made up, invented, manufactured tradition that will probably be 1,000 years from now they'll have a whole mythology about it, and where it began, lost in the mist of time, Singles Day. So I think the kind of, I don't know, takeaway is that I think companies, families, institutions, organizations should feel it permitted or encouraged to make traditions because they work, to mark the passages, to have a company culture, to do things because you've always done them that way. And that seems to be enough that you need to have a tradition. Is simply, we're just going to do this all the time, every time. And that gives a framework, a skeleton, a place to hang all the other good stuff about a tradition.
Nice. So I think where I go to from there, from traditions, which are almost about locking in a way of thinking, I am interested, having spent so much time putting together the book and reflecting on the challenge of some of these older ideas and wisdom. How has putting together the book challenged your own thinking? How have these trips and these visits and these tours challenged your thinking, your identity, the way you sort of see the world?
That's a good question. The thing about, I think the question that it provoked in me was, the vanishing part of Asia, throughout Asia. And again, I define Asia broadly from Turkey to Japan and down to, from Siberia down to Indonesia. And that's huge. And there's more diversity, almost between Korea and Oman than there is between Korea and the U.S. And so it's a big territory. But I saw all this stuff disappear from this very large territory, from Turkey to Japan. I was concerned, or I was worried, or I always was trying to figure out: does this mean that we're becoming homogenous? Is all the cities they do tend to look the same? Is this really the best thing that could happen to us? And so that's that worry and that concern really was something that shifted my attention from just trying to catalog the stuff that was vanishing to try and look to where the new things were happening, and to see whether there was this increasing diversity in the cities. And so this is the same moment, of course, as many of the Asian cities started to gallop ahead of cities in the Western Europe in terms of being futuristic and having things like cashless societies, and in many ways kind of inhabiting the future even before we would see it in the West. And so it changed me in terms of, while I went to Asia to record what was vanishing, I was being schooled in what was the future, what was arriving from the future. And I haven't done that systematically as I have been cataloging, but I think what I've changed my mind about is I'm really convinced that the future is going to arrive in Asia first in this next century. And I am telling myself, and I am educating myself, and I'm convincing myself through these travels and changing my mind that really, if I was to like run a new Wired magazine, I would almost entirely devote it to what's happening in that continent, because I feel that that's going to be far more important in the long term than the politics of the U.S. or whatever. So that's maybe where it changed my mind.
Well, anything that gets my mind off of the politics of the U.S.
Yeah,
sounds like
We'll
a good
take it.
idea. I'll take it. Give me 2 copies. That actually seems like a pretty good place to draw things to a close. So, Kevin, where can our listeners find out more about Vanishing Asia and maybe even get a copy for themselves?
Yeah. My home site is my initials, kk.org. That's my major website where everything kind of links out from. But if you Google Kickstarter and Vanishing Asia, you should arrive at the campaign that's going on right now. I am trying to have a Kickstarter exclusive price that anybody who buys or orders one, whatever they call it, you get a reward, which is a discount from the eventual retail price, because it will be available on Amazon eventually, probably at $300 for the 3 volumes sold together, which weighs, by the way, 27 pounds. So there's just the
goodness,
just the paper
just the
alone,
shipping,
just the shipping. Yeah, Amazon. Yeah, so it is a commitment in that sense. And yeah, head over there if you want. I have an Instagram account where I've been posting for the past year images from it.
Nice.
If you really don't want the paper version, there's a lot of images to enjoy there. I will continue to post images from the book, of which there's 9,000, so we're not going to run out. And when I write things on kk.org, there's another little blog called the Technium where I occasionally do post my more technologically oriented stuff. So you can find me there.
Nice. We will put links to all that in the show notes.
I would add one little last promotion thing, that I run a weekly newsletter called Recommendo, which has 6 recommendations that Mark, Claudia, and I do every week. There's this one page, and it's free. We've been doing it for 4 years now. It's the thing that people enjoy the most that I do, even though it's just kind of a side thing. So you can see back issues at recommendo.com.
Nice.
Amazing. Kevin, thank you so much for coming back and being a guest on our show again.
Well, we could have talked for hours. I wanted to hear more about what you guys are working on, but I know you have a whole podcast series, so thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, if you like what you're hearing, a review would mean so much to us, or follow us, or forward the show to someone who needs it. And please, please, please give to this Kickstarter, because I want this room of Kevin's books in my house. I'll host something with a tour if you all give.
All right.
Nice.
Thank you.
Hey, quick tip of the hat to Taylor Marvin for making us all sound good. Brave New Work is produced by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. Get in touch with us by emailing podcast@theready.com. And as for you, thanks for listening. Now go change something. Or don't.